The rain-snow mix tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Victor Langston's office, a dark perch on the 72nd floor of a Wall Street tower. It was Christmas Eve, 2025, and the city below glittered with holiday lights, a mockery of the emptiness inside. Victor, 55, CEO of Langston & Co., sat alone at his polished mahogany desk, the only sound the faint hum of a dying heater and the clink of an old wedding ring spinning between his fingers. The band was tarnished, its gold dulled by 2 decades of neglect, much like the marriage it once symbolized. Evelyn. He hadn't said her name aloud in years, but tonight, it lingered like a ghost. He leaned back in his leather chair, the tailored lines of his suit sharp against the dim glow of a desk lamp. Victor Langston was a man of discipline, forged in the crucible of a childhood he'd spent his life escaping. His father's drunken rages, the damp Brooklyn tenement where hunger was a constant guest. Success had been his shield, his proof. He wasn't that scared boy anymore. But it came at a cost. 20 years ago, he'd walked away from Evelyn, her soft eyes pleading under a rainy streetlight, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Stay, Vic. We'll figure it out." He hadn't. He'd chosen ambition over love, telling himself it was survival, not betrayal. The ring spun faster now, a restless little dance. He caught it mid-turn, pressing it against his palm until the edges bit into his skin. He didn't need her, he told himself. Didn't need anyone. That's what kept him sharp, untouchable, a titan in a world of glass and steel. Yet the memory of her smile, rain-soaked and defiant, clawed at him tonight, a crack in his armor he couldn't weld shut. His phone buzzed, jarring him from the spiral. A text from an unknown number glowed on the screen. "The girl's sick. Bad. You need to know the truth." Victor's brow furrowed, his thumb hovering over the reply button. The girl. What girl? His mind flashed to Evelyn again. Those eyes. That night. A flicker of unease stirred, but he shoved it down, tossing the phone onto the desk. Probably a prank. Or a scam. He'd built an empire. People always wanted a piece. He stood, restless, and crossed to the corner of the office where a sleek coffee machine gleamed, a Starbucks knockoff he'd bought on a whim. The rich smell of brewing espresso filled the air as he fumbled with it, cursing under his breath when hot water splashed onto his vest. "Damn it," he muttered, wiping at the stain with a monogrammed handkerchief. Evelyn used to laugh at him for this, his clumsy hands, his insistence on doing it himself. "Coffee's not a battlefield, Vic," she'd tease, her voice warm as she took the cup from him and fixed it just right. He could still see her, leaning against their tiny kitchen counter, the rain drumming outside their old apartment. The memory hit harder than the spill, a quiet ache he couldn't shake. Victor stared out the window, the city a blur of red and green through the icy streaks. Most people were home now, gathered around trees and fireplaces, sharing stories that had warmed them through the winter. He hadn't had that in years, not since he'd traded it all for this view. His reflection stared back, a man in a pristine suit with shadows under his eyes, the ring still clenched in his fist. What was he holding on to? A promise he'd broken? A life he'd never lived? The phone buzzed again, insistent. He ignored it, but the words from the first message gnawed at him. The girl's sick. Bad. Truth? What truth? He'd cut Evelyn out clean, hadn't he? No calls, no letters, just the silence of a man who thought success could erase regret. But now, standing here, he wasn't so sure. Something tugged at him. An instinct. A whisper from the boy he'd buried long ago. He slipped the ring into his pocket, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. Maybe it was time to find her, not to beg forgiveness, he wasn't that man, but to hand back this damn thing and close the door for good. A clean break, he told himself, though. The lie tasted bitter. He grabbed his coat, the black wool crisp against the chill, and headed for the elevator. The doors slid shut, and the hum of descent drowned out the storm. Downstairs, the lobby was deserted, save for a lone security guard nodding off by the Christmas tree. Victor stepped into the night, rain-snow stinging his face as he pulled his hati Audeba collar tight. The streets were quiet, a rare hush over Manhattan, the kind that made you feel like the last soul awake. He didn't know where Evelyn was now, Brooklyn, maybe, or somewhere farther. But he'd find her. He had people for that. Resources she'd never dream of. And when he did, he'd give her the ring and walk away. That was the plan. "Hey," he said aloud, his voice low against the wind as if testing the air. "If this story's hitting you, give it a like. Maybe even stick around for the rest. I've got a feeling it's only getting started." He smirked faintly, the words slipping out like a reflex, a nod to an audience he couldn't see. Then he turned down the street, the rain snow swallowing his footsteps, the ring a cold promise against his chest. The snow crunched under Victor Langston's polished shoes as he stood on a quiet Brooklyn street, the wind cutting through his coat like a blade. It was the day after Christmas, and the city had settled into a brittle stillness, the kind that amplified every sound, the creak of a rusted gate, the distant hum of a subway train. Before him loomed the old tenement where he'd last seen Evelyn, its faded brick walls now patched with graffiti and time. 20 years had passed, and someone else lived here now, a family judging by the plastic sled propped against the stoop. But the ghosts of his past lingered, sharp and uninvited. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, fingers brushing the cold edge of the wedding ring. Last night's decision to find her had hardened into resolve, fueled by that cryptic text. The girl's sick. Bad. He'd spent the morning pulling strings, old contacts, private investigators, until a name surfaced. Evelyn Harper, now, running a used bookstore a few blocks away. Harper. She'd kept her maiden name, a quiet defiance he should have expected. The thought stung, though he'd never admit it. Victor closed his eyes, and the street dissolved into memory. It was raining that night, a downpour that soaked through his thin jacket as he stood under a flickering street lamp. Evelyn had been there, 28 and pregnant, her hands trembling as she clutched his arm. "Stay, Vic," she'd pleaded, her voice breaking over the storm. "We don't need much, just us." But he'd seen his father in every shadow of that life, drunk, broken, a failure who'd left them nothing but debt and shame. "I can't," he'd said, his tone flat, final. "I won't end up like him." He'd turned away, her sobs fading into the rain, convinced he was saving them both by leaving. He'd been wrong. The wind snapped him back to the present, biting at his ears. He started walking, boots tracking through the slush toward the bookstore. Each step felt heavier, like the city itself was pulling him back to face what he'd abandoned. He wasn't here to beg forgiveness. Victor Langston didn't beg, but to hand over the ring and sever the thread tying him to her. That was the lie he kept spinning anyway. The shop came into view, a narrow storefront wedged between a deli and a pawnshop, its sign weathered but proud. Harper's Haven. Through the frosted window, he saw shelves stacked with books, their spines worn from years of hands. A bell jingled as he pushed the door open, and the smell hit him. Old paper, ink, a faint trace of lavender. Evelyn stood at the counter, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, reading aloud from a Christmas carol to a handful of kids bundled in coats. Her voice was steady, warm, the same cadence that used to lull him to sleep when he'd come home exhausted from double shifts. "Scrooge was better than his word," she read, her eyes crinkling as she glanced at the kids. "He did it all, and infinitely more." She paused to ruffle a boy's hair, and Victor's chest tightened. She hadn't seen him yet, standing by the door like a shadow, but he saw her. Really saw her. The years had carved lines into her face. But they were lines of strength, not defeat. She'd built something here, a life without him, and it made his empire feel hollow. He shifted, and a floorboard creaked. Evelyn looked up, her gaze locking with his. The book slipped in, her hands, but she caught it, her expression hardening. "Kids," she said, voice calm but edged. "Go pick out a story for next time." They scampered off and silence fell, thick as the snow outside. "Victor," she said, not a question but a statement, like she'd been expecting him all along. "You shouldn't be here." He pulled the ring from his pocket, holding it out, like a shield. "I came to give this back," he said, his tone clipped. "Thought you might want it." She didn't move, her eyes narrowing. 20 years, and that's all you've got?" Her words cut deeper than the wind, slicing through his carefully built walls. He opened his mouth to retort, but something fell from his coat, a faded Polaroid, fluttering to the floor. He bent to grab it, and his breath caught. It was them, him, and Evelyn, young and laughing, cradling a newborn swaddled in a blanket. Scrawled on the back in her handwriting, Sophie, 2006. The room spun. Sophie, a daughter. His daughter. He looked up, the question burning in his throat. But Evelyn beat him to it. You didn't deserve to know, she said, her voice low, fierce. Not then. Not now. Victor clutched the photo, the edges digging into his palm. I didn't, he started, but the words died. He hadn't known, because he hadn't stayed. The weight of it crashed over him. Regret, raw and unfiltered, a tidal wave he couldn't outrun. Evelyn turned away, busying herself with the books, her silence louder than any accusation. He stood there, frozen, the ring and photo in his hands like twin anchors to a life he'd thrown away. Evelyn, he said, softer now, almost a plea. She didn't respond, her back a wall he couldn't breach. The kids' laughter echoed from the back, a sound that should have been his once. Hey, he murmured, half to himself, half to the air. If this is pulling you in, hit that like button. Maybe stick with me to see where it goes. It slipped, out naturally. A quiet aside that didn't break the moment, just rode its edge. He slipped the photo into his pocket, the ring still in his fist, and stepped back into the snow. She didn't stop him, but her last words echoed. Not now. Not. Yet maybe he'd find out. The fire crackled in the stone hearth of Victor Langston's Hamptons mansion, casting flickering shadows across the vaulted ceiling. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the tall windows that framed a snow-dusted lawn stretching toward the Atlantic. It was 2 days after Christmas, and Victor stood by the bar, pouring a bourbon he didn't intend to drink, the amber liquid catching the light like a trapped flame. He'd invited Evelyn here tonight, not to the sterile office or some neutral ground, but here, to the heart of his world. A gamble, maybe, to soften the blow of what he'd learned. Sophie, his daughter, a secret kept from him for 19 years. The doorbell chimed, sharp and insistent. He set the glass down, smoothing his sweater, a rare break from the suits that defined him, and opened the door. Evelyn stood there bundled in a worn coat, her silver hair dusted with snow. Her eyes met his, hard as the ice outside, and she stepped in without a word, stopping just past the threshold. I'm not staying, she said, her voice clipped like she was rationing every syllable. Say what you need to. Victor gestured to the leather sofa by the fire, but she didn't budge. Sophie, he started, the name foreign on his tongue. You said she's sick. How bad? His chest tightened, a mix of dread and something. Softer he couldn't name. Evelyn's jaw tightened, her hands balling into fists at her sides. Bad enough, she said. Cancer. Stage 4. She's been fighting it for a year. She paused, her gaze cutting through him. She doesn't need you now, Victor. She never did. The words landed like a punch, stealing his breath. He'd spent decades building walls, money, power, a name that opened doors, but they crumbled under her stare. I didn't know, he said, his voice low, raw. You should have told me. Should have. Evelyn's laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass. You left us. I sent letters, dozens, begging you to come back. They came back unopened. You didn't want to know. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. Sophie grew up asking about her dad. I told her he was gone, dead, because it was easier than the truth. Victor flinched, the ring in his pocket suddenly heavy as lead. Dead. He'd been a ghost in his daughter's life, not by fate, but by choice. His mind raced, grasping for control. I can help now, he said, stepping toward her. Doctors, treatments, whatever she needs. Evelyn shook her head, backing away. We've managed without you. She doesn't need your money, or your guilt. She turned to leave, but Victor caught her arm, gentle but firm. Wait, he said, his voice cracking. Just tell me about her. For a moment, Evelyn softened, her shoulders slumping. She's tough, she said quietly. Loves books, always sketching in the margins. She used to draw you as a superhero, you know. Cape and all. Her lips twitched, a ghost of a smile, then faded. She stopped asking about you when she was 10. The image hit him hard. Sophie, a little girl with crayons, dreaming up a father who'd never come. He let go of Evelyn's arm, his hand, falling limp. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the bar, the screen lighting up with a news alert. CEO Victor Langston's secret family exposed. New York Post. His stomach dropped. He grabbed it, scanning the headline. Details of his marriage, Evelyn, a blurred photo of a teenage girl in a hospital gown. Sophie. How? He muttered, scrolling frantically. The story was everywhere. Twitter, CNN, every tabloid itching for a scandal. His empire, his reputation, teetering on the edge of ruin. Evelyn glanced at the screen, her face paling. You brought this on us, she hissed. Stay away from her, Victor. She's been through enough. She grabbed a coaster from the bar, scribbled something, a coffee order maybe out of habit, and set it down with a cold tachka fei. You still can't keep it hot, she said, a faint echo of their old days, then walked out, the door slamming behind her. Victor sank onto the sofa, the phone slipping from his hand. The fire's warmth couldn't touch the chill spreading through him. Sophie was dying. His daughter, a stranger. And now the world knew his shame before he could even face it. Picked up the coaster. It wasn't a coffee order, just 2 words. Leave us. Her handwriting, steady and final, mocked him. His phone rang, shattering the silence. He answered without looking. Langston, he barked. A voice, smooth and venomous, purred through the line. Victor, old friend. Enjoying the headlines? Richard Tate, his former partner, the man he'd buried in a ruthless takeover decades ago. I've waited years for this. You're done. Victor's grip tightened, knuckles white. You did this? Call it justice, Richard said, his laugh cold. Give me a shout when it all falls apart. Oh, and tell your readers to like this twist, maybe subscribe for the crash. It's gonna be good. The line went dead. Victor stared into the fire, the bourbon untouched, Evelyn's words and Richard's threats circling like vultures. He'd built his life on control, but now it was slipping, through the headlines, through the daughter he'd never known, through the past he couldn't outrun. He had to see Sophie, not for forgiveness, not yet, but because he couldn't turn away again. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly under flickering fluorescent lights, a sterile maze of white walls and antiseptic air. Victor Langston slipped past the nurse's station, his coat pulled tight to hide the tremor in his hands. It was late, the kind of late where the world shrank to whispers and shadows, and he'd come here against Evelyn's warning, against every instinct that screamed he didn't belong. But Sophie was here, somewhere behind these doors, and the need to see her, to know her, had clawed its way past his pride. Room 412. He'd bribed an orderly for the number. A crisp 100 slipped with a nod, the kind of move that once felt second nature. Now it left a sour taste. He paused outside the door, the faint beep of machines seeping through, and pushed it open. The room was dim, lit only by a green glow from a monitor and the soft spill of streetlights through the snow-frosted window. Sophie lay there, small beneath a tangle of tubes, her face pale but sharp, like Evelyn's in younger days. Her chest rose and fell, fragile but stubborn, and Victor's throat tightened. His daughter. 19 years lost, and here she was. He stepped closer, the ring in his pocket a cold weight against his thigh. He didn't know what he'd say. I'm sorry, felt too small. I'm your father, too big. But he had to start somewhere. Then her eyes fluttered open, locking onto his with a clarity that stopped him cold. You, she said, her voice hoarse but steady. You're him. Victor froze, caught like a thief. Sophie, don't. She cut him off, sitting up despite the wince that crossed her face. Mom said you were dead. Car crash, she told me. I even made a gravestone once. Crayons and cardboard. Her laugh was brittle, edged with something raw. Guess she lied. The words sliced through him, deeper than Evelyn's accusations. Dead. He'd been erased from her life not by chance but by design, and he couldn't blame her for it. She was protecting you, he said, the excuse sounding hollow even to him. I didn't know about you, Sophie. I swear it. Her eyes narrowed, searching his face. Protecting me from what? A guy who walks out and never looks back? She pointed to a sketchbook on the bedside table, its pages spilling with pencil drawings. Superheroes, cityscapes, a man in a cape she'd once imagined as him. I stopped believing in you a long time ago. Victor reached for the book, but she snatched it away. I'm here now, he said, his voice cracking. I want to help. Help? Sophie's gaze turned to steel. I don't need a savior showing up at the 11th hour. Mom's been enough. She leaned back, exhausted but defiant, and Victor saw Evelyn in her, the same fire, the same refusal to break. Before he could respond, the door swung open and a man stepped in, tall, graying, with a smirk that curdled the air. Richard Tate. Victor's stomach sank. Well, isn't this touching? Richard said, his voice smooth as oil. The great Victor Langston, playing daddy at last. What the hell are you doing here? Victor snapped, stepping between Richard and Sophie's bed. Richard shrugged, casual as if he owned the place. Checking on my investment. You see, I've been digging. Old files, old lies. That takeover you pulled on me, cooked books, fake audits. I lost everything, my company, my wife, my kid. His smile twisted. So I fed the Post your little secret. Payback's a bitch, huh? Victor's fists clenched, the memory flashing. Richard begging for mercy. Victor signing the deal anyway, telling himself it was just business. You're a coward, he growled. Using her to get to me. Maybe, Richard said, glancing at Sophie. But you made it easy. He pulled out his phone, a grainy photo of Victor leaving the hospital glowing on the screen. Next headlines ready. CEO stalks dying daughter. Like that? Subscribe. For the fallout. It's gonna be a hell of a show. Sophie coughed, a ragged sound that cut through the tension. Get out, she said, glaring at Richard. Both of you. Victor turned to her, desperate. Sophie, Out, she repeated, her voice breaking but firm. She grabbed the ring he'd set on the table. When had he even put it there? And threw it. It clattered across the floor, spinning to a stop at Richard's feet. He picked it up, chuckling, and slipped it into his pocket. See you soon, Vic, Richard said, sauntering out. Victor lingered, the weight of Sophie's rejection pinning him in place. Her eyes, wet with tears she wouldn't let fall, held no forgiveness, just a quiet, burning anger. He bent to fix the lamp by her bed, its cord tangled from her restless hands. His fingers fumbled, but he got it working, the soft light steadying the room. I used to fix things for your mom, he murmured half to himself. She didn't respond, just turned her face to the window, snow piling against the glass. Victor straightened, the emptiness clawing at him. He'd come to see her, to prove something, to her, to himself, but all he'd done was rip open wounds he'd never known existed. Richard's threat echoed, a noose tightening around his neck, but it was Sophie's words that hit hardest. I don't need you. He stepped into the hall, the door clicking shut behind him, and leaned against the wall, head in his hands. The truth was out, jagged and real, and it was tearing him apart. The storm roared over the Hamptons, a beast of wind and snow tearing at the eaves of Victor Langston's mansion. Inside, the fire had dwindled to embers, its faint glow barely touching the dark corners of the sprawling living room. Victor stood by the window, staring into the white chaos beyond the glass, his reflection a ghost against the blizzard. Sophie's face, pale, defiant, haunted him, her words from the hospital cutting deeper than the cold. I don't need you. He'd gone to her hoping to bridge a gap he'd never known existed, but he'd only widened it. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, a relentless intruder. He grabbed it, the screen flashing a call from Evelyn's number, her first since their fight here 2 nights ago. He answered, voice tight. What is it? Sophie's worse, Evelyn said, her tone clipped but trembling. They need a marrow donor. Now. A pause, heavy with unspoken weight. You're a match, Victor. Only you. The room tilted. He gripped the window frame, the wood biting into his palm. How long does she have? Days, maybe, Evelyn said. They're prepping her now. But you. She hesitated. It's risky. Your health, it could break you. Victor's mind raced, old fears clawing up from the depths. His childhood bout with pneumonia, his mother selling her wedding band to pay for medicine, the way weakness had terrified him ever since. He'd built his life to outrun it, piling wealth and power like armor. Now it could all unravel for a girl who hated him. "I'll do it," he said, the words out before he could stop them. "You don't have to," Evelyn replied, softer now, almost pleading. "She doesn't even want you there." "I know," he said, staring at the snow, "but I'm not losing her again." He hung up, the silence roaring louder than the storm. Richard Tate's threat loomed like a shadow. More headlines, more ruin. Victor's phone lit up again, this time with an email from his board. "Resign or we vote you out. The scandal's killing us." He scrolled through, numb, until a text from Richard popped up. "Give up the company, or I bury you deeper. Your call." The bastard had him cornered, but Sophie's life hung in the balance, heavier than any empire. Victor crossed to his desk, pulling out a stack of papers, stock certificates, the keys to Langston and Coalers. He'd spent decades building. It every deal a brick in the wall between him and his past. Now it was a bargaining chip. He dialed his lawyer, voice steady despite the quake inside. "Sell it," he said. "All of it. Use the money for Sophie's treatment, every dime." "Victor, you'll be wiped out," the lawyer protested. "You sure?" "Do it," he snapped, ending the call. The room felt smaller, the air thinner, but for the first time in years he breathed easier. It wasn't about redemption. Not yet. It was about her. He grabbed his coat and headed outside, the storm swallowing him whole. Snow lashed his face as he trudged to the guest house where Evelyn had agreed to meet him. Her car stuck in the drifts, a mile back. She was there, pacing the porch, her coat soaked through. She turned as he approached, eyes wide with something between fury and fear. "You're insane!" she shouted over the wind, stepping down to meet him. "Selling everything for what?" "For her," he yelled back, the words raw. "I wasn't there then, Evelyn. I won't fail her now." She stopped, snow clinging to her hair, and for a moment the storm seemed to hush. "You don't get it," she said, voice breaking. "She might not make it. And you could lose everything, even yourself." Victor closed the distance, his hands finding her shoulders. "I already lost everything 20 years ago," he said, his breath clouding between them. "I didn't know it till now." Her eyes searched his, wet with tears or snow. He couldn't tell. And then she collapsed against him, a sob muffled by his coat. He held her, the first time in 2 decades, her warmth seeping through the cold. The wind screamed, but they stood, there, locked in a moment that felt like a lifetime. "I'm not worth this," she whispered, pulling back, her hands trembling. "You are," he said, firm. "Both of you." He brushed snow from her cheek, a gesture so old it ached. "Hey, if this hits you hard, drop a like. Stick around, it's only getting wilder," he added, a faint smirk breaking through, his voice low like a secret shared in the gale. Evelyn shook her head, a ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. "You're still a fool," she said, but she didn't pull away again. They turned toward the main house, the storm raging on, and Victor felt the ring in his pocket, gone from his hand when Sophie threw it, but its weight lingered in his mind. He'd get it back, somehow. For now, he had a daughter to save. The hospital loomed in his thoughts, a battlefield he couldn't avoid. He'd face the surgery, the risk, the fallout. Richard be damned. As they reached the door, Evelyn gripped his arm, her touch a tether. "Don't die on me," she said, half a command, half a plea. "I won't," he promised, though he wasn't sure he could keep it. He stepped inside, the warmth hitting him like a shock, and headed for the car keys. The storm wouldn't stop. Him, not tonight, not ever again. The hospital waiting room smelled of stale antiseptic and desperation, a limbo of muted beeps and flickering lights. Victor Langston slumped in a plastic chair, his body aching from the marrow donation, a dull throb pulsing through his bones. The surgery had gone through hours ago, 6 grueling hours of tubes and needles, his lifeblood siphoned to save a daughter who didn't want him. He'd come out weaker, a shadow of the man who'd once ruled boardrooms, but alive. Sophie was stable, they'd said. For now. A styrofoam cup steamed in his hands, the coffee inside hot and black, a gift from Evelyn. She sat across from him, her coat draped over her lap, silver hair tangled from the storm they'd braved to get here. Her eyes were red-rimmed but steady, watching him with a mix of exhaustion and something softer he couldn't place. "You didn't have to do it," she said, her voice low, breaking the hum of the room. "Not after everything." Victor took a sip, the heat scalding his tongue. "Yeah, I did," he replied, meeting her gaze. "I walked away once, not again." His hands trembled slightly, the cup sloshing, and he cursed under his breath. Weakness. He hated it, always had. But for Sophie, he'd bear it. Evelyn leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her tone soft but piercing. "I raised her alone, nights in the ER, stitching clothes to pay bills, telling her stories so she wouldn't hear me cry. I didn't hate you, Vic. I just stopped waiting." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her coat. She wrote, "You letters, you know." When she was little. Never sent them, just stuffed them in a shoebox under her bed. The image hit him like a freight train. Sophie, a child with Evelyn's eyes, scribbling to a father she'd never met. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She wanted to know why you weren't there," Evelyn said, looking away. Then she started asking why she wasn't enough. Her words hung heavy, a truth Victor couldn't dodge. He set the cup down, the steam curling up like a ghost of his failures. "I thought I was building something," he said, staring at his hands. Hands that had signed deals, shaken power, but never held his daughter. "A life where we wouldn't scrape by like my folks did. Dad drank himself dead. Mom sold everything to keep me breathing. I swore I'd never be that helpless." He laughed, a dry, broken sound. "Turns out I built a cage instead. Locked. You both out." Evelyn's eyes softened, a crack in her armor. "You weren't helpless," she said. "You were scared. There's a difference." She reached across, her hand hovering over his, then pulled back. "I kept her from you because I thought you'd break her worse." Victor nodded, the weight of it settling deep. "I broke you instead," he said, the confession spilling out raw. "I thought honor was power, money, a name. I was wrong. It's this." He gestured vaguely at the space between them, the fragile thread they were stitching back together. She didn't reply, just watched him, and the silence felt like forgiveness, or at least a start. He stood, wincing as his joints protested, and crossed to the coffee machine in the corner. "Your turn," he said, grabbing another cup. He fumbled with it, spilling grounds on the counter, but managed to brew something decent. He handed it, to her, the steam rising between them, and she took it with a faint smile. "Still a mess," she said, sipping it, "but better than last time." They both laughed, a small reel sound that cut through the sterile air, and for a moment, they were back in that tiny apartment, rain tapping the windows, sharing coffee like it was enough. The door creaked, open, and a nurse poked her head in. "She's awake," she said, "asking for you both." Victor's heart lurched, hope and fear tangling in his chest. Evelyn stood, smoothing her coat, and they followed the nurse down the hall, the coffee cups left behind, still warm. Sophie's room was quieter now, the machine steady. She sat up, her face less pale, though shadows lingered under her eyes. She looked at Victor, then Evelyn, and back again. "You're still here," she said, her voice rough but curious. "Why?" Victor swallowed, stepping closer. "Because I want to know you," he said, simple and true. "Not to fix things, not yet. Just to be here." Sophie studied him, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. "I wrote you once," she said, almost a whisper. "Said I hated you. Guess I don't anymore." She didn't smile, didn't forgive, but the words were a door cracking open, and Victor clung to it. Evelyn sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and Victor stayed by the door, a silent sentinel. "Hey," he murmured, glancing at the ceiling as if it could hear him. If this is tugging at you, hit that like. Stay with us. It's a long road ahead. It slipped out, a quiet aside that hung in the air, natural as breathing. He pulled, the ring from his pocket. Richard had it, but in his mind it was still his tether and held it tight. Keep this, he said, offering it to Evelyn across the room. Not to wear, just to hold, till I earn it back. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and nodded. Sophie watched, silent, and Victor felt the first stirrings of something he'd lost long ago. Home. The rain fell in sheets over Brooklyn, a gray curtain blurring the neon glow of the city. Victor Langston stood outside the glass tower of Langston & Co., the place he'd once called his kingdom, now a hollow shell. After the sale, snowmelt mixed with the downpour, soaking his shoes, but he barely felt it. Across the street, Richard Tate leaned against a lamppost, his trench coat flapping in the wind, a predator savoring the kill. The air crackled with tension, the kind that preceded a storm's final blow. Victor's phone buzzed. Another headline. Langston's empire crumbles, fraud exposed. Richard had made good on his threat, leaking doctored files from their old deal, painting Victor as a thief who'd built his fortune on lies. The board was gone, the investors fled, and the press swarmed like vultures. But Victor wasn't here to save his name. He'd come for something bigger. You're finished, Richard called over the rain, his voice cutting through the din. I've got more, photos, emails. You'll be lucky to dodge jail. He held up the wedding ring, snatched from Sophie's hospital room, twirling it like a trophy. This is mine now, too. Victor's fists clenched, the urge to lunge at him surging hot and fast, but he held back, jaw tight. You think that's power? He shouted, stepping into the street. Ruining me? You've got nothing left to take. Richard laughed, cold and sharp. Oh, I've got plenty. Your little girl's next. CEO's daughter begs for mercy. The tabloids'll eat it up. He smirked, stepping closer. You took everything from me, Vic, my company, my family. I begged you back then, remember? Victor did. 20 years ago, Richard had been his friend, a partner with big dreams. When the deal went south, Victor had doctored the books, pinned the blame, and walked away richer. Richard's wife left him, his son cut ties, and Victor told himself it was survival. I was wrong, he said now, voice steady despite the rain. I'm sorry. Richard blinked, caught off guard, then sneered. Too late. He turned to go, but Victor grabbed his arm, spinning him back. Not this time, Victor said and raised his voice over the storm. I'm done running. He pulled out his phone, hit record, and faced the growing crowd, reporters, onlookers, cameras flashing through the haze. My name's Victor. Langston, he shouted, the words raw and unscripted. I screwed up, 20 years ago with Richard Tate, with my wife Evelyn, with my daughter Sophie. I built this company on lies, and I left them behind to do it. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to hear me fix it. The crowd hushed, rain drumming the only sound. Richard's smirk faltered. What the hell are you doing? He hissed. Victor ignored him, eyes on the cameras. I sold Langston & Co. to save Sophie's life. Every cent's going to a fund. Sophie's hope. For kids like her, fighting to breathe. That's my honor now, not this. He gestured. At the tower, its lights dimming in the storm. Richard, you want revenge? You've got it, but you don't get them. A murmur rippled through the crowd, phones filming, lights blinding. Richard lunged, shoving Victor back. You think this saves you? He snarled, waving the ring. You're nothing. Victor stumbled, but caught himself, rain streaming down, his face. Maybe, he said, loud enough for the mics. But they're everything. He straightened, soaked and steady, as footsteps splashed behind him. Sophie emerged from the shadows, leaning on Evelyn, her hospital gown traded for a coat. Her eyes were fierce, though her frame was frail. Give it back, she said to Richard, voice cutting through the rain. He hesitated, then tossed the ring at her feet, a sneer twisting his lips. She bent slowly, picking it up, and walked to Victor. You're an idiot, she muttered, but her hand found his, pressing the ring into his palm. Don't lose it. Again. Evelyn stepped up beside them, her gaze locked on Victor. You didn't have to do this, she said, rain plastering her hair to her face. Not all of it. Yeah, I did, he replied, closing his fingers around the ring. The crowd parted as they stood there, 3 figures under the flickering streetlight, a family forged in wreckage. Richard backed away, his victory souring, and disappeared into the storm. Victor turned to Sophie, her hand still in his. I'm not going anywhere, he said, a vow carved in the rain. She didn't reply, just squeezed tighter, and Evelyn slipped her arm through his, her touch a quiet anchor. Hey, Victor said, voice low as the cameras rolled. If this hits home, drop a like. Stick with us. We're not done yet. It came out soft, a breath against the wind, blending into the moment like it belonged. The light flickered above, casting them in a halo of wet gold, and for the first time, Victor felt the weight lift. Not gone, but shared. The rain slowed, the crowd dispersed, but they stayed, rooted under the streetlight. He'd lost his empire, his name, but gained something he couldn't name. A second chance, fragile and real. Richard's threats faded, drowned by the sound of Sophie's breathing, Evelyn's warmth. It was enough. The snow fell soft and steady, over Brooklyn, blanketing the streets in a hush that felt like forgiveness. It was Christmas Eve, 2026, a year since the storm that had stripped Victor Langston bare, and the air carried the scent of pine and cinnamon from the open doors of Sophie's Hope. The community center stood where a vacant lot once festered, its brick facade warm with light spilling from within. Victor had poured every dime from Langston & Co.'s sale into this place, a haven for kids battling illness, a promise kept under the glow of a new winter. Inside, the main room buzzed with life. Kids in knitted hats darted between tables piled, with cookies and cocoa, their laughter a melody Victor hadn't known he'd missed. He stood by a makeshift stage, a worn copy of A Christmas Carol in his hands, reading aloud to a circle of wide-eyed faces. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone, he finished, his voice steady, warm. The kids clapped, a few tugging at his sweater. A thrift store find, soft and unpretentious, a far cry from the suits he'd once lived in. Sophie perched on a stool nearby, her sketchbook open, fixing a string of lights that had flickered out, on the tree. She was stronger now, her cheeks flushed with color, though the shadow of cancer lingered in her careful steps. You're better at reading than fixing stuff, she teased, tossing him a grin as she plugged the strand back in. The tree blazed to life and the room cheered. Victor chuckled, setting the book down. Guess I had a good teacher, he said, glancing at Evelyn. She moved through the crowd, handing out mugs of hot chocolate, her silver hair catching the glow like a halo. She'd taken to this place like it was hers, organizing volunteers, soothing worried parents, a quiet force he'd spent too long underestimating. A year ago he'd stood under a streetlight, rain-soaked and broken, confessing his sins to the world. Richard Tate's threats had fizzled, his leaks lost steam when Victor gave up the fight, and the man faded into irrelevance. The headlines moved on, but Victor hadn't. He'd traded Wall Street for Brooklyn, the penthouse for a modest brownstone a block away, shared with Evelyn and Sophie. It wasn't perfect. Sophie still kept him at arm's length some days, and Evelyn's trust came slow, but it was real. He crossed to the tree, picking up a fallen ornament, a tiny star Sophie had drawn on cardboard years back. Still got your superhero touch, he said, handing it to her. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and hung it high. Mom says you're hopeless with decorations, she replied, smirking. But you're not so bad at this. She nodded at the room, the kids, the life he'd helped build. Evelyn joined them, her mug steaming in her hands. He's learning, she said, her eyes crinkling. She wore the ring now, not as a vow, reclaimed, but as a quiet reminder, slipped onto her finger one night when he'd asked, tentative and raw, if she'd keep it close. She had. Victor watched her, then Sophie, the weight of the past settling into something lighter, not gone, but carried together. He'd written it once in a journal he kept by his bed. Honor's not what you win. It's what you give back when you've gone too far. This, Sophie's hope, this family, was his give back, his amends stretching beyond their walls. A young mother approached, her son clinging to her leg, a boy with a shaved head and bright eyes fresh from treatment. "You helped us," she said, voice thick. "The fund got him through, thank you." Victor nodded, throat tight, and knelt to ruffle the kid's hair. "Stay tough, champ," he said, and the boy grinned, running off to join the others. Evelyn squeezed his arm, her touch steady. "You did that," she murmured. "Not the money, the choice." He looked at her, then Sophie, the room alive with second chances. "We did," he corrected, and she didn't argue. The tree lights flickered, casting them in a soft glow, and for a moment the world shrank to this: laughter, warmth, a family pieced back together. "Hey," Victor said, voice low as he leaned toward Sophie. "If this warms you up, hit that. Like, stay with us. We're just getting started." It slipped out, a gentle nudge woven into the quiet, and she rolled her eyes but smiled. The night wore on, stories and songs filling the air. Victor stepped outside later, snow crunching underfoot, and stood under the same streetlight where it all turned a year ago. Its flicker was gone, fixed steady now, a beacon over Sophie's hope. Evelyn joined him, slipping her hand into his, and Sophie followed, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. "Merry Christmas," Sophie said, her breath clouding in the chill, and Victor felt it, the first real one in decades. The ring gleamed on Evelyn's finger, no longer a relic of loss, but a mark of what they'd found. He pulled them close, the snow falling soft around them, and let the past rest. This was home.